Yeah, I'll still make it up as I go along, but I have notes. So I am just honored to have all three of you here. Do you all have a live mic?
Hello.
Yep.
Hello.
Yes, I hear everybody. All right.
Hello.
And so these people both have different services and components and projects that they're working on. Something that already does chain abstraction, one of these key crucial services in an app chain, if you will, and a platform in which you can deploy lots of new things that might produce it all together. So we've got different perspectives to then bring to thinking about this general chain abstraction narrative that starting to show up or is already showing up broadly across the crypto ecosystem. So why don't we start at the end there and introduce your project and what are sort of the use cases, if you will, that for which chain abstraction is relevant to your project?
Yeah, absolutely. So as you probably know, I'm building on Neutron, which is the integrated application network, e.g., it's a network that provides components outside of the virtual machine that allows smart contracts to build applications that are more powerful and able to distribute their services across any number of chains. And so in that way, it's very relevant to cross-chain abstraction because the platform itself sort of gives developers the tools to abstract the cross-chain complexity away from user experiences, essentially, right? And so I think cross-chain abstraction in the case of Neutron is relevant in two perspectives. One, it is something that's required for applications to be able to successfully scale across larger networks to address new markets and become accessible to new users. And it's also, from the perspective of the user, a key component of providing the right experience for decentralized financial applications to essentially be able to compete with centralized experiences. Because if we have 15 clicks at every step of the way, of course, we're unlikely to win, let's say.
Yeah, one click only. So I'm Jelena. I'm the co-founder of Noble. So Noble is a Cosmos native asset issuance chain. We like to think of ourselves as the most application-specific blockchain that exists in the sense that we focus on one very specific application, which is asset issuance. So you might be thinking, well, why do you need a whole chain dedicated to an asset issuance application? And the reality is that as obviously the world is becoming more modular and you have these very custom workflows and you have many layer ones and roll-ups, having that central point of liquidity sourcing for something like stablecoins is really important. So we brought native USDC to the Cosmos ecosystem, and we're working to bring on many more stablecoins, many more assets, one of which we'll announce this week. So stay tuned.
Cool. I'm Zaki. Co-founded Sommelier. Myself, my co-founder Christy, and I had this vision of, making DeFi strategies just accessible to everyone. If you've been participating in DeFi for a long time, it very quickly turns into a full-time job. Clicking, moving, reallocating, monitoring different opportunities, and it's great for people who want to do that as their hobby or their full-time job, but not for everyone. Yet there's DeFi is really important plumbing to everything in crypto. So the design of Sommelier is, it's a Cosmos app chain that is providing governance, alignment, security, all of these different essential services. But when you experience Sommelier, you access it directly from the Ethereum L1 or from an Ethereum L2. And you kind of all of this cross-chain stuff is not superficially there. It's there if you go deeper. We have auctions of bridged fee assets. We have all kinds of cross-chain activity going on, but that core user experience. And as we mature everything, we just continue to build with this philosophy of abstracting away the fact that you have to deal with multiple chains. And we have about 80 million TVL on the platform right now, and it continues to grow.
Cool. So I'll start with you. Just follow up on that. So what's hard about that? What are the source of friction in doing this in Cosmos or even broader outside of Cosmos? Right.
I'll give you a couple of different ways in which things that when Sommelier started, we started before even IBC was live. We started very early. We started out with our own version of the Gravity Bridge. As the sort of base technology. So we were owned our own bridge, owned our own consensus layer, wrote our own all of our own smart contracts, all of that stuff. We didn't really have, so we had to kind of invent the entire universe. And the so this, to get very sort of into the weeds from a developer point of view, the way in which the execution of DeFi strategies on Som moves between ETH and the Som chain, moves between strategists. Following that whole code path is like the Sommelier core team can do it. And if anytime we onboard someone, it's like they're like, what does all of this do? How, this stops, this thing happens, then where in the code does it pick up? First there's like a message handler, then there's a begin blocker, then there's a smart contract executed on Ethereum, then there's an Oracle, then that executes something else. It's like, how can anyone follow this? It's taken a long time and it's been really, really hard. But it allows us to be like basically the only thing like this in DeFi that isn't just a multi-sig. And so it's very cool what it can accomplish. And I think the growth of Sommelier shows that there's, I basically say you build all of this stuff because you want to make the make money button really simple and easy to use, just so people can just push the make money button. They're like, I would like to make money. Please don't make me do anything else. And so you do all this work to make that possible. And I think the other thing that is really hard also is we have good support for users moving things from one chain to another thing across blockchain and pushing the thing forward. But having that automation, having orchestration in the app so that the user can just give control is still a very emerging and immature thing. But when it works, if you want to swap ETH for build, now you can go to ibc.fund, you could sign one transaction, and it may take 20 minutes to execute because ETH finality is slow, but you don't have to do anything else. The funds will just show up in your wallet. That's just substantial improvement to wait 20, do step 1, wait 20 minutes, do step 2, wait a minute, do step 3, which is how we've been doing things for the last 3 years.
Yeah. Well, can you hear me? Okay. Yes. It's been a very iterative, process for making these workflows much simpler. And ibc.fund is now a perfect example where you can do these token transfers in one click that do route through, many chains. One example of something that we're working on, which I would say is kind of part of this orchestration kind of philosophy, these complicated workflows, is something called the forwarding module. So it's an application, it's a module that we built leveraging the interchain accounts. So for example, if I want to, let's say, take native USDC and I want to off-ramp that to through a chain. So in this specific example, there's a company called Crafton. They're building Settlers chain, which is a chain built for creator payouts in the gaming sphere. So Crafton is obviously a well-known Korean gaming company that built PUBG. If I want to take my USDC issued from Noble to the Settlers chain and then off-ramp that, let's say, to a Stripe account or just in my bank account, I can actually even do that with one click using IBC and interchain accounts more specifically kind of on the back end. So that one-click process, even something as, practical as getting paid, not even necessarily just make money, go burr or whatever, but something very, very practical is something that's possible with these complicated kind of workflows that become very simplified using these various tools. So it's very exciting. It's been a very iterative process, but I think we're getting much closer to having these things be super simple.
Same issue here. I agree. I think one of the things that is interesting to me is that we're seeing a lot of these things actually be tried out in the wild now, which it wasn't really the case months and years ago, to be fair. The technology, the bridging technologies and such, the fact that the ecosystem is now way better connected is obviously a massive help. But even with new standards ICA is coming out, what we saw is that actually we didn't see a lot of applications of these technology right out of the bat, right? And I think one of the reason why that's the case is because, well, the Cosmos SDK does allow you to build blockchains themselves much faster than anything else, which is absolutely amazing. It does still require a lot to release something through the SDK into production, right? It's a trial. Trying out a new feature is months of development, tough auditing, coordinate an upgrade, and you better hope that your product is going to find a market. and actually work by the time that it gets onto production, right? And so like one of the approaches that we've taken in this regard is like, hey, how about we make these available to things that are like a bit more modular and a bit more lightweight to release, so that people can actually like innovate and iterate like much faster. And this is like, for example, like ICTX module on Neutron, which allows smart contracts to register interchain accounts on other chains. And the idea is there, one, people are able to like building a smart contracts is a lot faster. It's cheaper to audit and such. And so like we can make it a lot easier for developers to try things out. And if they're successful, the great emergent property of this is that like the smart contract can be reused, right? And so we're seeing teams like Timeway, for example, who are like doing this whole like, kind of like treasury orchestration almost across the
Not almost. That's totally a treasury orchestration.
Yeah. And the thing is like they're putting a lot of work into figuring things out because it's kind of like still new at this stage, right? But like all of the work that they're doing leads them to develop like some of the components which we're seeing now are actually super useful in just like general like sub-DAO management. Like, hey, I have funds on this other chain. How do I like conveniently bring them over to like my account on this other chain? Which I don't want to be crafting an IBC message like every time for this. Like I can automate this with a small contract, right? And so like I think what's really interesting is that like the cross-chain applications that are building today using these kind of like frameworks are kind of like laying some of the groundwork to make the next wave of like entrepreneurs and builders that will try to bring these cross-chain experiences to market like so much faster and so much easier, right? And so
curious, you brought up, you used the word modular, right? Modular, in some sense, helps lead to the explosion that now leads to chain abstraction to wrangle all of those new resources up. So, but the platforms where you can deploy smart contracts give you some of that same explosion. I'm curious from your perspective, and we'll go back around modular across all the rest here, is how does the rapidity of deploying a smart contract on a contract platform versus deploying a new chain in a modular context, are they similar, or what are the differences in terms of how they contribute to needing abstraction or needing the chain abstraction solutions, sort of end-to-end user scenarios?
Yeah, I think so. So a small contract platform, right, is a shared environment. So applications on that platform don't really need orchestration because they can just compose. But the thing is, like, a big part of like Neutron's kind of like early vision was like, hey, we have all of these app chains, right? And they're, as you presented, they're sort of like still fragmented and such, and we need to be able to build a connective tissue that brings everything together into like a really convenient experience so that we can aggregate all of the make money buttons into one place and just like allow people to access them conveniently, right? And so like Neutron to us was kind of like a way to bring that about by making it like super easy to build this connective tissue and tie things together, right? The idea is that like you can build an application that extends to all of these chains, right? Like, so for example, you can build like restake, like a stake managers, like kind of like you presented, where you can control your stake all across like these chains. Maybe you have like your own preferred validators that you want to stake to and just claim rewards and do something in DeFi with it. All of this you can automate fairly easily. You can also have the other approach whereby it's like there's this application on another chain, but by creating a bit of a layer which caters to the user experience, right, like a smart account or such, I can sort of like provide a single entry point for users to then be able to access applications on other sort of like modular stacks, essentially, right? There's one last component to this modularity thing, which is that like smart contracts themselves are actually pretty the smart contract architectures are actually pretty modular, right? So there's this protocol like building on Neutron right now, and the way that they're approaching it is as a design choice, they are looking at IBC as like the main source of complexity into the architecture, and so they're trying to break down each single action as closely to that complexity as possible, so that they can develop like very small, tiny, auditable, reusable components that just like encapsulate the complexity of one action, and so like abstracts it away from the rest of the architecture, so that at the end of the day, you're deploying like a few of these components that you can reuse over time, and you have one core contract to tie them all together. The beauty of this is that like these components, if they work, they can then be reused by any other applications because all of it is open source. And so like, like that's why I'm talking about like crossing DeFi Lego, I guess.
So I'll take it to you as the consummate app chain. What's your perspective on that?
So, I mean, just more broadly, we find ourselves like in the situation as everything is becoming more modular, chains and kind of roll-ups and various like service providers, they're forced to become specialists and have this specialization of offering or like a product. So for Noble, we're sort of on this front line. It's very interesting where we have many teams sort of coming to us, whether it's a project like Nisha, maybe, Ethereum projects kind of looking to build in the Cosmos ecosystem, and they want to know, like, how do we source liquidity? How do we get native stablecoins, things like this? And so we have to be that sort of specialization kind of chain in this like one particular use case so that we can help kind of connect everything else. But as we become more specialized, it's interesting. We're also pushing standards. So there's this like very interesting process where you have this specialization factor, let's say something like native asset issuance. And so you're inevitably pushing kind of standardizations, on things like, IBC and various applications on top of IBC, things like interchain accounts, or even ICS kind of 20v2 standards and things like this. And so that's like ultimately the way that we see kind of this like modular kind of development going in this very sort of specialized kind of narrow way. So the more modular you become, kind of the more specialist you're forced to be, and then through that you can push those standards into the rest of the modular ecosystem, which I think is a much more organic sort of bottom up, obviously, approach to development and growth and things like that.
Mm-hmm. So I guess I kind of want to take this in a different direction. I want Jelena's comments on this as well, which is like, I think like one of the goals that we're trying to, the only way to make this whole modular world work is to make it so that chains are kind of invisible to user actions, right? So like with Somm, we've like tried to make the Somm chain somewhat invisible to the core user action. And I think with Noble, you guys have done a similar job.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for Noble, it's funny, many chains, like your kind of go-to-market strategy, right? Like if you're building a Cosmos chain, a layer one, it doesn't even have to be a Cosmos chain. It could be any layer one, layer two. Your whole sort of, initiative is to have that activity on your chain, right? You want the liquidity, you want the users, you want the mind share, you want these like special applications and user experiences, and you want to build your brand and obviously have your token sort of be valued as a result of that. Noble obviously took a very different approach where we are completely abstracted away. So you're probably, if you're, obviously using USDC and in the future other assets, touching Noble at some point, but you don't know that. And you shouldn't know that because there isn't necessarily a reason for you to sort of, host your activity on the Noble chain itself and kind of be stuck there, so to speak. So this portability and this sort of, obviously interoperability is super key to us. So that's ultimately what we care about, building the bridges, but in a way where you don't even need to know you're like there, so to speak.
It's like you're abstracting away the chain in order to get a solution.
Yeah, I think it's called chain abstraction. I think that's the new hot thing these days.
We should do that.
Yeah, it's fine. Yeah, and I mean we're experts in there, so yeah.
So the other thing is, we need to get out of the Cosmos ecosystem in some sense. We need, chain abstraction is not about abstracting across Cosmos things. It's about abstracting across crypto more broadly. By the way, you mentioned IBC.fun earlier. I'm not actually sure, going to the abstraction thing, whether that's using Skip, Axelar, Hyperlane. I'm not using some of this stuff, or Sommelier, I don't know. And that's cool that we don't, right? It just works. So anyway, I'd like your thoughts, sort of start with you on what do we need more of in order to get to have chain abstraction help the overall Cosmos ecosystem to get more visible and more accessible, if you will, in the broader crypto economy.
Maybe you can take a quick first stab at this. I think one of the beauty of chain abstraction, right, is you can get distribution from everything, but you can also sort of disappear into the network effects of other ecosystems essentially. And so I think, Jelena proposed, their vision for Noble, which I think is exactly what needs to happen for the verticals that they're catering to. But to an extent, we also need to ensure that our ecosystem of applications and products is up to the task of competing with other established products and applications in other ecosystems, right? Because if our applications are not battle tested, so improved and actually providing unique, attractive products, then once we connect to the entire thing and make the barriers basically zero, all of the existing users and capital will just flow to the better options, right? That's kind of the point. And so to get there, we kind of do need to be able to build network effects that bring entrepreneurs and developers to using the technologies that we're putting out there, and so like actually showcasing their benefits and their maximum capabilities, right? Like Cosmos is incredibly powerful because it provides you with sort of like this native interoperability as well as this like very deep consensus control. But there's actually in practice very few projects that really leverage these capabilities to do something really crazy. I think we're seeing that change now with like, DYDX is a really good example. I think like Slinky in general is going to bring these benefits to like a number of chains in the ecosystem. So we're seeing more and more of this is like even on the cross-chain side of things, we're seeing more and more people use more advanced use cases of IBC than just like token transfers. But still, we're in terms of the products that we have available, we're not that mature yet. And so while we break down these barriers and try to bring in like users and capital, we should also make sure that we're building things that are differentiated and appealing enough that we actually don't get subsumed into other ecosystems either, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, the entire debate right now with L3s and L2s and L1s and, what is an L3 versus what is an L2, and is an L3 just is an L3 just a less censorship resistant, kind of more centralized kind of application on top of an L2, which is just a, multi-sig, at the end of the day, which is, on top of an L1, which is, this chain that isn't necessarily the most, performant and scalable thing. And, we're kind of building this like House of Cards or Tower of Babel, whatever analogy of kind of visualization you want it to have in your
That's
mind.
That's not very modular of you.
It's not. Well, and so anyway, so we have this like debate and we have this like very interesting situation happening right now. And I don't know, maybe I'm just idealistic, but like to your point around like, bringing in more builders into our ecosystem, I think they'll inevitably come once they realize that, L2s were a good idea and L3s were a good idea. And how much further can we really go until, a Cosmos app chain is just the way to go, or a roll up. But yeah.
I don't want to monopolize like the discussion, but this is actually something I spend a lot of my time thinking. And like, I do think you have a point. I just don't know that it's sufficient in our sort of like experience of like trying to understand the thought process of first, we always talk about like onboarding developers, right? And I think this makes sense to an extent, but it's also obfuscating the reality that like people who actually put teams together and get stuff shipped are also entrepreneurs, right? They might be technical and expertise, but they're entrepreneurs, right? They see an opportunity, they seize it, and they try to make something big, right? And the thing is like entrepreneurs in their sort of like value and decision process, right? Like the technology and what enables you to do is like definitely an important criteria, but I would argue like from our research, it doesn't seem to be the main one, right? The main one is actually what is the opportunity, what kind of advantages can I get in order to tap this opportunity and win, be successful essentially, and then, where can I build it? Because like there are some technical limitations and stuff, and Cosmos is incredibly well placed on this third category, right? But it is pretty poorly placed still on the, what's the size of the opportunity, and it's okay, but we can do better in terms of like, really empowering people, like being like, hey, if you build with us, we will give you competitive advantages. Like we will help you win, basically.
Yeah. So I think that kind of very much dovetails into like what the original question was, is like, how do we extend the relevance of chain abstraction beyond Cosmos? And I think, the success of like the way DYDX went to market is like a great example of sort of this idea that, you can present a user experience that doesn't have to be so grounded in Cosmos, but you could use every piece of Cosmos tech, right? Like you can use Cosmos, you can use the Cosmos address format, you can use IBC, you can use like the latest and greatest APCI++ features, like all of that stuff can be completely baked into it. But if you design your product around, hey, like we're going to build with the affordances that our users have, like that like our user base has, and like our knowledge of, the previous versions of the product that we built and other things that are out in the market, you can actually deliver like a really, you could deliver a user experience to a very wide audience. And so I think like one of the real keys for Cosmos is that ability to use the tech, but go after an audience that isn't just atom holders or just isn't people trading on osmosis, because that is today still a very small piece of the wider blockchain market.
Yeah, I mean, I would obviously echo that. Even though we're all obviously very big fans of like Cosmos and the stack, I still take like the kind of mentality or the mental model that Antonio had, which is we just want a superior UX. We want to offer really useful products. If it's built with the Cosmos stack, great. It just so happens that that is the place to build the most superior product. So, it is this like virtuous cycle of, bringing projects in and kind of building and being able to leverage kind of the existing kind of stack and infra and kind of tools, to do chain abstraction. So, I think it's inevitable, but we'll see.
So let me take one break. We will have an opportunity for questions from the audience. So think about if you have questions for the audience. I've got more questions here, so we'll come back, but I just wanted people to have that in their head. So you mentioned it's the best place to, it's got a bunch of advantages for people just building solutions without it being Cosmos in their face. What are some of the things that we need more of? What are the things that are in progress but not getting the love they need, or are stuck, or are challenged in the ecosystem to be able to make it easier to build these end user solutions and in particular these cross-chain solutions that take advantage of multiple chains?
Yeah, I'll go first. So obviously, like as many people know, I've been kind of thinking a lot about like shared security and things like interchain security, which would love Svea to kind of talk about. I would say that is still a factor that's like not the easiest thing to necessarily figure out in the Cosmos ecosystem. Like even though ICS is great, and now we have like V2 or partial replicated security, it's still not the necessarily easiest thing for like especially Ethereum people to like wrap their heads around, because it is so like kind of governance driven. And so, maybe add other shared security models, where, Ethereum projects can come into the space, bootstrap a validator set, spin up a degen chain like we have on top of Base. That's not an L3, but in fact, something a lot cooler, would I think be super beneficial. So I would say the thing that's missing is more optionality, like on your kind of security model. And like, obviously, a product or like a protocol like ICS, but more optionality on that front to help projects kind of bootstrap in Cosmos. So that's like what's missing. And then I guess like we can also talk about like different like apps that make sense, whether that's like more in the DeFi space or whatnot. But I would argue that that's like kind of a precursor to actually seeing like those products take off, like having that kind of ease of use from like a shared security perspective.
Okay. From my perspective, like if we look at the features we're talking about, right, these things that enable like the most advanced use cases, they're very advanced features. Like tweaking the consensus of your chain so that it provides a better product is not something you do out of the bat, right? It's not a hackathon project, right? It's something that is like deeply something you need to think about, right? And DYDX has tremendous experience and knowledge to be able to do that, whether, to see how that can be adding value to the product, right? And so like in reality, I think we're talking about very advanced teams here, right? And so like, in my opinion, these profiles are capable of picking any stack, really. Like whatever is going to allow them to do the thing that they're looking to do anyway is something that they can eventually learn, right? And so if that's not the main fundamental blocker, then what it is, right? It's, in my opinion, it's like, first, like knowing about the stack and what it enables you to do. I think like we can do a lot better job as just like evangelizing the stack, its capabilities, and bringing it to like distributing it to other ecosystems. And two, so like access to users and capital, right? Like today, there is a strong incentive to go build a inferior product that will make a lot more money because it will be launched somewhere where, from the get-go, you'll get millions of dollars of liquidity and like hundreds and thousands of users from the get-go, right? And so I think like as an ecosystem, I think we've excelled at one, being visionary on like what technologies are needed to build the coolest shit in the future, and developing it, bringing it, right? I think there's like side things that we can improve at, as like, how do we maintain, release these things so that like that development can be well coordinated. But like where I think we really need to up our game is like distribution, like these are like almost dirty words in Cosmos, but like marketing and like business development and that kind of stuff, right? It's like it's actually useful, And so like I think this is somewhere where we can actually achieve meaningful progress from where we are at today. that will massively move the needle for the ecosystem. Does that make sense?
Spade, you naughty boys.
I love business development.
I think that there's like, yeah, I think there's like I feel a tension in terms of like, how we spend our time, right? There's, on one hand, there are many ways in which like the Cosmos stack, the IBC, like what's available in IBC today is like better than anything that exists in any other ecosystem, really. On the other hand, it's like, it feels, it's very much, it hasn't, like, there's been a lack of big fundamental advancements in like IBC protocols, etc., since like 2021, 2022. And we know a lot more about like what user flows exist, what people might want. We know about the value of these like one-click experiences. And we can build a lot of, there's still a lot of infrastructure and a lot of protocol. So it's like, how much time should we be spending bringing our like current set of innovations, getting them distributed better, integrating them into like other communities in crypto, and how much time should we be spending, with, okay, how do we make it so that like a streaming swap, etc., can be like executed with, a single click? How much time should we be spending? Oh, like interchain accounts is actually like really developer unfriendly today. How do we make that developer friendly? Should we be writing new, there's a lot of space for writing new IBC protocols, right? We basically have two IBC protocols that anyone uses, ICS-20, which is token transfers, which then has like this very complicated sub protocol with memo fields in it. And then like we have interchain accounts, which are pretty much only used today for liquid staking, but were conceived for other applications, but has challenges. We should be writing new IBC protocols, but they're a lot of work. And they're like the kind of development that Spade was talking about, where, you have to work on these things for months and months before you find out, sometimes years before you find out if there's product market fit.
So let me take a pause here. Are there any questions from the audience? Yes. Oh. Yeah, go ahead and shout it out. I'll repeat the question.
Yes, just chain abstraction doesn't run after the IBM distribution, because the cycle is kept. I think one idea of getting users on is the lack of maximum. So I think you have some company on a lot of space, and thank you.
While we definitely want to make the technology easy to use, do we want to almost disappear? How do we retain our brand and our loyalty and almost like the fervor of our users if we want to minimize the prominence of our chain?
Study noble. No, I think like if you build, maybe this is like too simplistic, but if you build something kind of useful enough, like the way that we're thinking about noble, like it's iterative, right? There's like V1, which is like just do the thing, build the plumbing, like get, do proliferation of assets, like be neutral, align yourself with app chains like Neutron and Agoric and Osmosis and all the chains, and get the thing that everybody wants, which is stable coins. Cool. Low fee, no friction, single source of place for minting, burning, etc. And then on top of that, if you have that kind of useful thing that everybody uses, you can build the apps, you can build the front ends, the tools, etc., to make those, make that one use case even more accessible and kind of modular and useful. So I think like it's not about building walled gardens and having all of the cult and all of the users on your chain for the rest of time. I think that also just goes and like it's antithetical, I think, to just I think like crypto in general, like cults are like not a sustainable way of building community. So I think that's my opinion. That was a lot of rambling, but
yeah, I guess like my general thesis is that like, so that like what in the parlance of the day we call execution layers, right? There's this shared execution environment, whether Solana, there's a shared execution environment around Base, etc. I tend to view these things as in the long run commodities. Like the only thing that isn't a commodity is distribution, right? is distribution and utility. So like, is your app useful? Is it useful to a wide variety of users? Does it generate sustainable utility? And are there a lot of on-ramps and off-ramps and stuff like that? So in some ways, like, the value of Base in my way is that, like, you have the distribution capacity of Coinbase, right? But it is very much the trade, or every bull market, there's a trade, right? Where people are like, this chain is the next cult. We go invest in the next cult. But like in the long, as you kind of go over many cycles, the ecosystems that offer consistent utility are the ones that sort of separate out.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with this. The one thing though that I think is like there's a timeline here to try and like think about, which is like, I think chains become ultimate memes once we have applications that are actually successful at competing with centralized offerings. Like once somebody displaces Binance, then that application is going to be absolutely massive, and whichever stack it's built on is kind of like irrelevant, because what matters is the product, right? But like we're actually probably still, a decent way away from that. And so I think in the meantime is kind of like the reality of the meta is like, we invest in the cult. So, now if we look at this like a bit pragmatically, our cults, or like just our general tendency towards tribalism and cults, something that we can actually leverage to help, usher in these applications that will actually be able to compete with centralized applications. And if so, then that's a pretty powerful tool in my opinion.
Yeah, I think like another way of putting your question is like, is chain abstraction like antithetical to value capture, right? Like, how do you do value capture if, there is chain abstraction? We just
provide a valuable service.
Yeah, build something people use.
Like my example earlier, right? So the other side of this, and I'll chime in sort of on the answer side where we started, is what users want is chain abstraction. We can do, is simple user experience that doesn't care about the underlying asset, right? They want to...
Actually, I would say no. What users want is easy access to products that they want, right? Chain abstraction itself is not a product, but it's a way of providing this first component, right? The easy access to the make money button.
Good clarification. I mean, what they want is that easy access to their service, and they don't, and there's this wave of tribalism initially, but at the end of the day, if you're not delivering value to the end users, then all this becomes relevant. So here's a question for each of you, which is, at some point there will be an app that is agnostic to the underlying chain that users want. Right. And they will be going to, not Skip, but to IBC Fun, or they will be going to, whatever this thing is that does the job that they want. And one of those will be what catches fire in the broader, economic, mainstream ecosystem, and brings along whatever is tied to it. Does that happen this cycle? What's the curve? When are we likely to see the first one of those? So we'll start with you. We'll go this way.
Are you trying to tell us something?
Get off.
Okay, we'll do this and then we'll go.
Okay, we'll finish quickly.
Next cycle, maybe? Probably on this cycle.
Yeah, I think the best projects are built in the bear, so probably in the next cycle.
Sure, that's an easy answer.
All right, Marco, when is it? Yeah. Thank you all for...
It's a panel abstraction.
Sure.